Hey everyone, thanks for joining us today. My name is Shim and I'm a DevRel engineer here at Preset. And today I'm going to talk a little bit about managing your dashboards as code for the typical benefits that come along with that, from version control systems, code review, continuous deployments, and more. I'm also joined here by Veto, our engineer who actually worked on the CLI and everything. If he wants to say anything, we'll give him a chance.
Yeah, I'm just wanted to say welcome to everyone, and I hope this is useful.
Cool. So before we begin, let's just talk about Superset real quick. So what exactly is Superset? Superset is a modern open source BI platform that works with nearly any SQL speaking data engine. It offers a large diversity of charts to create visualizations and dashboards to really gain insight from your data. There are typically two main workflows within Superset. The first being Explore, which provides you with a no-code chart builder, and Superset actually generates queries on the user's behalf. This is all enabled via SQL Alchemy, and typically the people who are going to be using this workflow will be your data consumers and data explorers, those really looking to gain insights from your data without really having to be too technical. The other main workflow is supported through SQL Lab, which provides you with a full SQL IDE. And here, Superset users actually create the queries, which remain untouched by the Superset or Preset backend and run against the target database that Superset is connected to. This workflow will typically be used by more like your data engineers, data scientists, or like your technical data explorers, for example, like analytics engineers. Preset is a multi-workspace cloud-hosted superset with all the capabilities of Superset included. Layers onto a SOC 2 compliance and user documentation is available. Various controls are provided for you, like row-based access control, single sign-on, with enterprise support and an embedded SDK that's in the works. Preset Managed Private Cloud is Preset's BI platform for your AWS private cloud with all of the same capabilities as Preset Cloud, with additional enterprise support. So now let's talk a little bit about dashboard discovery versus delivery. But before we hop right into dashboards, let's talk a little bit about what we're seeing here. Simply put, the double diamond design model, it's a system that designers can follow in their creative process. And it typically comes in 4 stages. We're going to see how this is applied in a more sort of illustrative example demo a little later on. So usually discovery involves like the insight into the problem. This is the starting point for most projects or preliminary ideas. It's characterized by a divergent sort of thinking where a range of different people will work on different ideas to really understand what it is, what the problem is that they're trying to address. Eventually, this converges to a definition where we kind of reframe or define the problem. We've come to terms with what it is that we're actually going to work on. And again, as we begin our development before our delivery of a solution, we go back to this sort of divergent process where different prototypes, different tests, and different possible methods of delivery are all explored. Eventually, all of that converges once again to a final solution. And we'll see in a little bit just why all of these little pictures and everything are in here. But to summarize, before we can build, ship, and maintain any production quality data product, the delivery portion of it, we have to make decisions about what to build first for discovery. So discovery using the preset GUI. So in the example that's coming up, let's pretend we're a bike sharing system company, and we're interested in creating dashboards for internal analytics with the goal of really better understanding our customer base. What stations do most people like to ride on? Are there differences between subscribers, non-subscribers? What time of day are customers most active? How far, do our average customers go? How long does a bike stay checked out? Ultimately, what we're interested in delivering is a dashboard that'll contain all of the visualizations, that'll contain the answers to support like the end goal of selling more subscriptions or optimizing services for the heaviest users and locations. So discovery is very easy when it comes to using it with Preset. In this case, this database that we're looking at here, our city bike trip data, this is simply raw data that comes in and Preset makes it super easy. In a matter of seconds, you can connect your database, you can get started on exploring, and you can sort of build this dashboard. Let's say all of those questions that we talked about in the discovery phase, we're happy with what we have. We can't really deliver a final product like this, especially when it's not really managed, and we plan to use this for repeated use, for delivery, for analysis, as like an ongoing sort of code asset. So what would we do now? When it comes to delivery, you'll see we have DBT highlighted here. I won't go too much into what DBT is, just because we covered it a lot last week at our other demo. So you feel free to go check out that recording on YouTube. But in essence, what DBT is it's a transformation tool that lets teams kind of quickly and collaboratively deploy analytics code following software engineering best practices, like modularity, portability, CI/CD, documentation. Makes it much easier for those who know SQL to build production quality data pipelines. In essence, DBT lets you version control your data models. You can deploy them safely into dev environments. Git-enabled version control allows for this collaboration, and it allows you to test every model prior to production. It's a pretty important tool, especially in like a modern data stack and modern data infrastructure, and creating this robust sort of trusted data infrastructure. When you have analysts who aren't as plugged into the engineering practices, they want reliable sources of data to really work to provide this sort of analysis for their company on. And what we're doing here is we're going to use DBT to take our raw data, all of that discovery that we did sort of using the initial raw data that we had, we're going to productionalize it using DBT. And I will link to a code repo where you can sort of see how a model project or something might look at the end. But in essence, DBT will create this new database within the same warehouse, because DBT transforms your data where it lives, where it creates this new analytics database for us that we know is our version controlled, source controlled, managed data sets, certified, trusted, everything that we're ultimately going to use for the final delivery of our dashboards. That part of it isn't going to include the dashboards as code just yet. So we just kind of talked about what DBT is here. I meant to show that slide for that. But so now we have to talk a little bit about the PresetCLI. And what the CLI allows you to do is it allows you to interact with both preset and preset workspaces. And you can interact with the Superset instances within there using the CLI. The tool is what will let you manage the dashboards using source control and allow you to synchronize these assets across multiple workspaces, which we will see an example of. The CLI was built for Preset, but it also works with standalone Superset. So if you're running Superset, every time you see sort of this like PresetCLI command or PresetCLI Superset, you can just use Superset instead. I won't show an example of the Superset Sync DBT. Like I said, we had a pretty long demo last week on that, so you can go check that out. What we're going to really be focused on is the Superset Sync native commands here. The important part for really exporting and managing your dashboard and your sort of visualization assets is code. So one of the advantages of this CLI and being able to do this is that if you're running a standalone Superset instance and you want to move over to Preset, the CLI will let you easily migrate all of your Superset assets over. And on the flip side, if you're a Preset customer and sadly you decided, you know, I've had enough of us, you kind of want to leave, you also have a tool to do that. This is one of the biggest advantages to using open source commercially. There's no vendor lock-in. And like I mentioned, we won't really go too much into the Superset DBT commands, but again, feel free to go check that out later, and you'll probably see some of it today. So with that, let me hop right into my demo. So I'm going to stop sharing and just find my windows. And while I do that, I'm just going to pull up that dashboard that I kind of showed that we created. 1 second. So everyone can see that, right?
Yep.
I'm not sure why I got logged out while that was logged in. Okay, so that dashboard that we initially discovered, created, we're going to work under the assumption that it is delivery ready because we used dbt to sort of create all of our models. And I can show you a little bit what that looks like in GitHub right here. And we'll also see it in my terminal window. But essentially, this dashboard here is built off of a bunch of different data sets that come in from our analytics warehouse, just like in that diagram that we saw. I'm not going to open up my Snowflake warehouse or anything right now, but we can see all of these data sets that we pulled in by dbt, and that's how we are building that primary dashboard. Now, second. Now, let's say that we do want to manage this as part of our version control. If we go back to this repo, we can see that while most of this is just a core dbt project itself, we have different models here that we use to create these derived data sets that feed into it. What we care most about is our assets directory. In this case, we have sort of incorporated our dashboard assets and everything within the same dbt project, but you can always separate this in different repos if you want, just as long as you know how to go back and find all of these things for yourself. So I'll show an example here where what we can actually do is I'll show you what this project looks like, and I'll actually show a live edit of the dashboard itself. So in this workspace, we see the City Bike Rides dashboard is created. The first step to managing this as code will be to actually go out and export the dashboard itself, which is right here. And what we get back in the export is readable YAML files. And what these YAML files will have is essentially the representation of what your dashboard is, along with all of the assets that come along with it. So I'll open up this dashboard YAML file itself, and here you can see the dashboard title is here, all of the different charts that you would see in the dashboard itself. And just so you can see that one-to-one comparison, like we should see the rider type pi name, rider type pi, and essentially it contains all of its sort of position and any sort of metrics that might have been built on the chart. So given that we have this sort of dbt project created along with our assets directory here, one thing that you can always do now is begin to actually maintain this as code. So if I wanted to make this live change where I wanted to rename my dashboard, I can save this. So I'm not going to put this into the assets directory itself because I can actually sort of just explain this first command to you. What I'm going to do is I'm going to find that folder that I just opened. 1 second. Yeah. Right here. So we can take the PresetCLI command and actually specify the workspace that we want to sync to. And I'll also show an example of what it looks like if you don't specify a workspace once we finalize this and we want to upload it to a new workspace. So PresetCLI, one of the prerequisites to being able to do this is installing the CLI. The CLI is open. You can go into the repo itself. There was a link in the slides, and all of the installation instructions are there. The workspaces flag here specifically refers to where this dashboard lives. And the Superset sync native command, what it's saying is it's trying to take the native export of Superset, and it wants to sync that back to this workspace. So we also want to include the dash overwrite flag because what this does is it's also going to look through all of these different database YAML files that we saw that actually literally define like even our connections to our data sets and our databases. And it contains all that information. Like how does it know where is this member trips.yaml file coming from? Member trips is actually just a model that is in our derived folder here. And what membertrips.yaml will contain is sort of what that definition looks like to Superset. So I don't know. Yeah, it shouldn't. It won't have my password because I believe you'll see in a second that this prompts you for it. but it contains all the different IDs that will identify this data set to the database that it lives in. So going back to this command, what I want to do is I want to take that file that I just edited, so not the member trips.sql, I want to reconfirm that this was changed to say live demo. We're going to hit save. And we saw that this is the folder that we used. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to simply drag this in because the superset sync command is looking for this exports folder that contains these assets for you. And because these assets already exist, it would error if I didn't put in the overwrite flag because it would try to recreate essentially these database connections for you, which we know there is no change. We don't really care too much about it. So we can just hit overwrite and we can actually see I missed the sync native command here. And we can see that it's actually asking for the passwords to redo that sort of connection in the same space. And once that is there, we can go back to this dashboard itself. And what we should see is the name changed. Awesome. Now let's say that, so you guys just saw me just kind of export a file, kind of point it to a directory and sort of just force overwrite that as a change. If we were doing this properly, you can actually see what is contained within my assets directory or within, my assets folder in this project, which also really just has those three folders that we care about, the charts, the dashboards, and the data sets themselves. So you can imagine in a more robust, you would make like a PR to do something like this. You could change that. And then once it goes through all of those proper code review processes and everything, then you could push these changes live. But for the sake of the demo, I'm just kind of doing the weird hacky ways. But again, all of this lives within this Git repo here. I'll provide the links at the end. So you can feel free to go back, recreate, mess with it all. So now that we've seen this, what I'll actually do is I'm going to re-export just this. So we know that we're seeing this live from scratch. There was nothing funny going on, where the name of this dashboard has just completely changed. If I go back to my dashboards and I re-export this folder, for example, I'm going to open it and I will just rename this to the export. I already have a test 1 somewhere. I know that. So I'll just call it the export test 2. We can just put that right there. And then I'm going to show you a workspace that does not have this dashboard. So this workspace here, if I can actually, I created this when I first actually joined Preset as like sort of my onboarding learning space. And I kind of never went back to it after those first 2 weeks. So it was a perfect place to go and try to put this new export into. So this time, without using the workspaces flag, I'll show you what that looks like. Because the CLI itself is interactive, it will, and I'm not going to go through the auth process or everything. So because if you install everything correctly, you'll be able to just follow along and do this exactly the same way. Going back here, we're going to get rid of this because we know that we saved our export outside. And the reason I'm showing you this is because we would also, if we ever have these changes to our dashboards, say we wanted to deploy these out into multiple workspaces, there's other things you can do, like within the, I know we can use like Jinja templates, for example, to sort of restrict who can access what. So you can even customize what the dashboard looks like as you put it into different workspaces. In this example, I didn't go too in depth, so you're not going to see that specifically. But if I just drag this folder into here, and remember, this is the one that contains that name change, City Bike Rides with the parentheses live demo. I'll hit overwrite one more time. And what I should see now is it'll actually ask me for the workspace itself. We know that this workspace is, I'm pretty sure it was just Shrisham, yeah. So if, and most people won't have this many workspaces. Again, I think Beto also made the same joke last week. He works for Preset, so we see all of these. You guys won't, so there it is. It's number 76. This is why using the workspace flag is simpler. If I hit 76, you can see again, it's actually asking for those same credentials because it wants to be able to sync back to all of those databases that are specified in those YAML files. And I hit enter. Let's give it a second to run. What we should now see is if I go into datasets, for example, 8 seconds ago from which is my DBT schema name, that's where it got this from. All of these datasets are in here. If we look at the two databases, you can actually even compare to the passwords that they asked for. We should see, our Bike DBT Demo Analytics database and a Snowflake. So these nicknames were something that I specified. Within Snowflake itself, we saw the diagrams. That's what it actually looks like. Cool. And now the important part, were we able to deploy this dashboard with our changes to the workspace? Here it is. So that's just probably one of the more simplistic, some of the more simple things you can do with it. With that, I'll leave it. But again, there's a lot more you can do once you start exporting and managing these assets just as code, pushing them to your repo, going through proper PR processes, and also deploying them, like making those custom changes that you need. You can create this sort of robust data product delivery that, maybe our hypothetical bike sharing company wanted. With that, that's the end of that part of the demo. So with like the last 10 minutes, I'll leave it open for questions from the audience.
I think we have a question on the chat about using a secret manager like Key Vault, secret manager, similar, because I mentioned, Srisham, you type the password, but you can actually write the password in the YAML file.
Oh, okay.
So that you don't get prompts, but then, like I said, it's less secure. So yeah, I don't think we ever have a use case where we integrated with like some kind of secret password manager, but at the end of the day, the configuration lives in a YAML file, so you should be able to integrate, like either like the YAML file can be a template, so that's also another way you could have the passwords call a Python function or something that would be replaced, or you could process the template to inject the password before running the CLI.
And then I believe if you are attached to the idea of like plain text passwords in your YAML file, I believe there's like secret service tools like Ansible and stuff that, if your repo is private, those people can see what they need to, but usually it won't get revealed. It's probably pretty poor practice to put your passwords into the YAML file itself, but
yeah, and we have a blog post about using GitHub Actions, so you could also have the YAML file read from a GitHub secret, and then the GitHub action would populate.
Oh, how does Superset generate dashboard and dataset IDs? Can I use this approach to move dashboards from staging to production?
Yeah, I can talk about that. So every asset has an ID, which is internal, and it can change, but it has a UUID that, as the name implies, it should be unique. So every time you're importing something, if the UUID matches, it will overwrite anything that has the same UUID.
Since I have a file up, I was just going to go in and just
nice. Yeah.
Pull up the UUID from one of the data sets, for example. We can go to the actual DBT sets, look at our ride history. I believe it was all the way. Yeah, there we go. We can actually, this is actually a depends on. No, this is the UID. Yep, for this table.
Yeah, everything has a UID, so that's how you match between assets. For generating a dashboard that you want to move from staging to production, there are different ways to do that. Like, again, related to the UID, you would probably have your staging database have a UID, your production database have a different UID, and then you could go to the YAML file and then have Jinja template that points to the right UID depending on which environment you're in. Or, I mean, the databases could also have the same UID. I think that could be error prone. I would probably have different UIDs for a staging and a production database, and then have a template in where you're in your YAML file, so that when you push to the environment, it points to the right UID. And then you can just have the dashboard in one place, and when you push to different environments, it just points to the right database. And we have a question on the Q&A. Where are the connections passwords stored when dashboards are in production use? They go to a database. So Superset has a metadata database, a database that is used for all the metadata. This can be Postgres, MySQL, any relational database. At Preset, we use Postgres, and then we have an encrypted column where we store all the credentials, all the passwords, anything that is, depending on the database, you need more than password. You might need like credentials as JSON. So all those, they get stored in an encrypted column in your database, encrypted with a customer key. So that is SOC 2 compliant.
I can take Vortex's second question. So he was saying, can you please elaborate on the workflow to develop the dashboards? Do I always overwrite all the assets by exporting them from the UI and then deploying them to production? So I wouldn't think that you would always have to do that. Like I mentioned, in this case, what I was doing was actually exporting and just kind of feeding in what the file location was, because it made for a quicker example. But if I look within, and here's a link to the repo too, so you can actually go and check this out for yourself. I'm going to just drop it in the regular chat. But you can actually see we do maintain a separate assets directory. And what you saw in those unzipped folders that I showed, it's exactly that. It's what we care about within our dashboard, our charts, our dashboards, and our data sets, those YAML files. So if this is already managed and source controlled in GitHub, you could probably set up some sort of action to sync or deploy to new workspaces as necessary. You can also push these changes directly to your master branch and then sort of resync or re-update as necessary. Again, most of these I think would be done via GitHub Actions.
Yeah, and they're so lightweight. The current flow, we overwrite everything. So you have your repo with all the assets you want to manage. And then I think in the blog post, we have an example where you use a GitHub action. Every time anything changes in the repo, we push everything. But there's nothing preventing you if you don't want to overwrite everything all the time. You could have multiple directories. You could have one directory per dashboard, and then you can just push that dashboard, overriding just a part of the assets.
Does the CLI work with open source Superset out of the box? I think Beto could probably speak more to limitations on that, but I believe
it does. Yeah. So the CLI, if you look at the docs on the GitHub repo, I can share here. At the very bottom, it says how to use for Superset. So basically, everywhere you see preset CLI Superset, you just replace with Superset CLI. And when you use the CLI with preset, we use a token to do all the authentication. If you're using the CLI with open source Superset, it only supports user and password. So if you're using a different way of authenticating with your Superset instance, you probably need to like implement it. It is very modular, so it has different authentication classes, one for preset, one for Superset user password. So if you have a different way, you just need to implement like an authentication class. But yeah, let me share the link here. At the very bottom, we say how to do that.
And I think I just wanted to call out when the first time I used this CLI, it was a lot easier than I expected, much easier than other CLI tools. That's just props to Beto over here for that.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'm a big fan of putting a lot of effort to make things effortless. Yeah. My personal philosophy, it's never the user's fault. If something is hard, it's always the developer's fault. So I try to do that. Yeah, so the preset CLI makes things very simple. Like first time you run, if you don't have a token, it will like prompt you to go to the page and send you there to generate a token. And then it will ask if you want to store the token for the next time. If you don't specify a workspace like Srisham showed, they will list your workspaces and ask which one you want to run. If you're doing an operation with the database, if you don't specify the database, it will also read all your databases, ask which database you want to use. And that works for preset only because we have the APIs to do this introspection on like what workspaces you have and everything.
Yeah, and I mean, I didn't want to show a giant error on the screen, but actually when I was like running through this demo, one thing I forgot was the overwrite flag. Actually, it like saves you from yourself. If you don't intentionally overwrite something, it will give you a pretty clear error, and it says like this database is connected or this data set is already there. Because this command, as you saw, like I can just take any random dump of an export, change it to whatever I want, and sort of just sync it. It has to be pretty clear from the user that no, I want to overwrite this.
Yeah. That's something I picked up when I worked at Facebook. Like all the tools at Facebook, if you were doing something dangerous, you had to put like a flag that was like -- I'm stupid. And,
before they...
yeah, you literally like some of them had to put -- yes, I am stupid and I know. And so like if you make a mistake, it's very clear that you shouldn't be doing that. And if you type that flag, you should be really thinking if you really want to do that.
We only have a minute left, so unless any other questions start coming up, thank you for joining us today, everyone. Hope this was helpful. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out. I'll put our emails in here. All of the people who were present in the chat today. And there you go. Yours.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, folks.
Bye.